that I am being anonymized or de-identified, there are ways to do that. And I'm going to go there right now. It might be a question you're asking. This is one of the reasons why Mozilla is in the ads business now, is because in order to learn how to change an industry, it's one thing to scream about it, but it's another thing to be in the belly of the beast, learn how it works, and enact change from the inside. We can go there deeper, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, well, it's interesting thought, because I know, like, in a lot of ways, Mozilla does have a higher bar for privacy and trust than some of the other platforms. And having covered the Google antitrust case the last couple of years, that was one of the threads of, like, Google does have a higher bar for, like, the ways that they don't track people. And in some ways, it's taken a financial hit because of that, because it has a higher bar. So when you're talking to, say, like, consumers and explaining the value of that, or to say advertisers, and you're explaining it. So how do you convey that to different audiences? Like, you're showing, like, the value of having a higher privacy bar.
Yeah. So I have personally been on the road for this whole year, chatting with agencies, with advertisers, with programmatic providers, and the level of interest in a trusted platform because their brands feel safer that way is staggering. So it's been heartening for me to know that there is a big portion of the industry that cares about a trusted platform because they have brands that want to advertise in a family-safe or brand-safe space. So that leads to the concept of how do you create a trusted relationship between a human being who's seeing the ad, between the brand that they care about and want to see the ad from, and the platform that they choose to engage on. I think that's important. We're very clear with advertisers and agencies that we're never going to share individual data. I'm sorry, that's just not something we do. And the reception has been positive. Is Mozilla going to leave money on the table because of that? Yes, 100%. We're never going to be the sucky ad platform. It's always hopefully going to be high quality and trusted. But the point of that is to try and get into the industry, change how things are done, have these conversations on the inside, not from the outside. And also, just a reminder, anything we do funds our manifesto. It does not fund a billionaire. So I just want to put that out there. Yeah. That's important.
Yeah, what's the tag? You guys had a campaign recently. It's the only platform not backed by billionaires or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm kind of curious. So when it comes to the brands and maybe advertising, what are some factors that go into the ways that, like, agencies or the brands that are advertising think about privacy? Like, are there certain lenses or criteria that you're thinking about when it comes? Because on the one hand, you have the signals that they need for the performance, but on the other hand, it's sometimes hard to really convey that. Like, you have the targeting stuff, but you also have the performance stuff.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I do think there is an appetite, as you said, first of all, for more of these solutions that don't rely on hugely granular data. I mean, the fact is that these are companies who have spent, often millions of dollars building up a brand over years and decades that consumers trust. They don't want that to be undermined by, doing things that are gonna screw up that trust. And I think, what we're looking for is, the ad environment, definitely it makes a difference to how people perceive your brand. And I think on one hand, it's about being in a space that is aligned to the values of your brand so that it feels like it's a synergy rather than something that is conflicting. I think most advertisers want to be in a general environment which is not full of ad clutter and poor quality ads. I don't think anybody wants their brand to be sitting there in somewhere where it's like, and here's a pop-up ad, and here's 10 ads telling you how to get rid of toenail fungus. And, that is not what any kind of premium brand wants to be surrounded by. And then I think there is the data side of this, and I certainly, in Europe, I think increasingly we're seeing advertisers becoming very aware of, like, how data was collected. Is it consented? And I mean that in a genuine way, because you get a much better result when people are actually consciously giving you permission to use their data and genuinely meaning that. So I'm not talking about those things where you get, here is a pop-up and it's like, we're number 865 of this website's trusted partners, because nobody is going to remember giving consent to that. So it is about kind of working, I think, with, if you're going to be using that, working with data partners that actually obtain data in a way that, is from a genuine relationship with the consumer.
The Tony and fungus thing actually reminds me, I've got to go there. I worked at Trust and Safety in Meta. I grew up in the ads org. I was there since 2012, and we built the advertiser integrity or trust and safety team from scratch. And we had so many debates about these zoomed in creatives or pictures of fruit that actually led to crypto scams. Eventually, so there was a lot of good stuff that went in these platforms. But the reason why I even did that is because, again, get in there and make change happen from the inside is what I firmly believe in. So it just reminded me that when you think about scams or you think about just poor quality creatives and what they're leading to, there is something around consumer education that's important. I know we chatted about this a fair bit, but we've all read the news. A lot of large platforms are moving away from investing in trust and safety. Reuters had something on that recently. So what do you do as consumers? Educate ourselves, know what's misinformation, know what's a scam, and then it's on the platform, and that's where Mozilla takes this stuff seriously, to very simply explain to the consumer, what are we doing with your data, what are we doing in advertising, and then take it further if you want on educating on other topics.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Just for context, in case anyone hasn't read the news in the last day or so, there's a great Reuters investigation that noticed that I think it's like 10 to 15% of revenue from Meta were scam ads, like revenue from scam ads. And I figured was it 10 billion, I think, a day? I'm blanking, I'd have to fact check the number, but it was a high number. And it was interesting, too, reading that report and how that one way they deterred the ads from, was raising the price of the, the ad auction, but that also ended up making them more money on the scam. So having been there and helped to fix those things, now seeing all that kind of implode from the outside, does that in some way help Mozilla also gain more advertisers when you're seeing what a healthy ecosystem could look like, and you're also seeing the challenges that maybe the bigger platforms that have more gravitational pull, the problems that they have. So any thoughts on, does it, in other words, more concisely, do the problems of other platforms end up becoming a selling point for Mozilla?
Yeah. Yes and no, because we have never opted to go say, oh, we're better than Meta or whatever. I think that's understood in many ways that we're a very different platform. We are who we are for a reason. We believe in a healthy internet, right? So all of that is just our values. When I go out there and talk to, say, agencies or whoever, I don't compare us to anybody. Just the Mozilla brand itself has the pull, and we're known to be a safe, trusted, not violating your data and your user control kind of space. So that itself speaks for itself. The values speak for themselves. When it comes to Meta, though, put yourself in the shoes of a marketer. Marketers care about data, and they care about performance. They've got to go to their CFOs and say, here's how I'm spending my money, here's the ROI. That's where things start to break, because they're starting to prioritize cheap reach over trusted reach. Mozilla is going to be about trusted reach. Everybody else can do what they need to do for their survival, right? Or for their revenue, or for the stock market, or whatever it might be. So I don't see ourselves comparing each other, because our values are just in different places.
That's fair, yeah. So because everyone often talks about trust and the role of trust and whatnot, I'm kind of curious, how do you measure, is there some sort of trust KPI? Because I guess on the one hand you have the consumer trust piece of it and what they're seeing and what that means for the platform and the brands, but also the advertiser side, they want to trust the platforms that they're buying ads on and whatnot. So what does it look like, I guess, to measure? Could trust be measured, or does it feel like it's just too theoretical?
Yeah. I'm happy to take that, and
I'm looking at it more from an implementational kind of impact sort of lens. But there is absolutely no doubt that trust makes a real difference to a lot of marketing metrics. And it's also very closely related to things like privacy. And I think there was a study recently that showed that people are 70% more likely to accept your cookies and to opt into your email marketing if you provide good privacy information. And you can see this all the way along. It's good information about why you're targeting people with certain content offers. It improves your conversion rate if you are straightforward and you tell people, you are seeing this recommendation because it relates to something that you clicked on previously. I think sometimes people try to perpetuate this narrative that privacy and safety is somehow the antithesis of performance, but it's just not true. Trust is really key, and the more people trust your brand, the more you actually do the right thing like that, the more willing people are to share data with you, and the more likely people are then to respond to your ads when you use that data, because people remember actually giving you consent to use it. So like there's a real genuine payoff, I think, to trust that can be seen in quite tangible ways.
Yeah, I don't think it's an aspirational KPI. I think it is an important metric, one that hasn't been defined. We get to define it. I think it's a long-term play, because we talked about brands that prioritize cheap reach over trusted reach. Think about the value of trusted reach. If you think in the long term, you can really connect deeply with your consumers because they're going to care about you, they're going to trust you. And what does that do? Your ads are going to perform, and the consumers are going to recommend your brand to more and more of their circles of friends and people they know. And that is reach in a very different way. It's something the ad industry that's going after short-term gains hasn't yet figured out.
Does it seem like the industry overall, like back to the short-term gains part, does it seem like the industry overall feels so pressured to look at those short-term gains rather than looking at kind of the long game, I guess, with a lot of this stuff?
I don't know if it's necessarily feeling pressured as such. I think a lot of it came from a sort of a way to manage complexity, if you like. So, I'm old enough to remember a time when it was a much simpler media landscape with just like a handful of TV channels in the UK, and it was very easy to get reach and to hit the consumers that you wanted to target with your ads. And then all of a sudden with digital, there was this huge fragmentation, and now suddenly there's all these different websites and blogs and videos and platforms, and it's like, whoa, how do I reach these people now in this new era? And so I think the narrative that came out of that, which was like, hey, you don't really have to worry about the environment, you just go after the audience, and it's about the right people with the right message at the right time. It almost simplified that for advertisers and kind of made that an accessible way of dealing with this incredible complexity. And I think now we've seen the next iteration of that with a lot of the kind of platform AI-driven solutions like PMax and Advantage Plus and Performance Plus and all of these sorts of things, which is kind of an idea of like, you just tell us what your goal is and you give us your budget and we'll let the magic AI sort this out for you. And I think for sure that's driven some efficiency gains for a lot of advertisers, and I don't want to diss those products. They can be extremely good at efficient sales. But the price of that is you also lose a degree of control over your advertising, and you lose a lot of the learnings of what kind of resonates with your audience. I think it used to be you ran a campaign and then you'd analyze the results and you would go, okay, so people like these kind of creative messages, or they responded to ads in these kind of environments, but you took those lessons about what your consumers liked and responded to, and you built that back into the next wave of your campaign. Now I feel like the only people who are getting those learnings are the big platforms, and I think, in the long term, that's going to be to the detriment of some of the brands.
Well, it's interesting too, like on that point, there's more and more examples of, these platforms also not working in a lot of ways too, whether it's like a lot of small advertisers they're blowing through their budgets much faster because they don't have the right controls on, or a lot of examples of AI generated ads that are not to brand like protocol, whether it's a weird creative or whatever else. And it's like, so it's interesting to see like how these things are more efficient, but they're always harder things to control, I guess.
There was something I saw recently in a survey. It was a UK survey, but it said that, what was it now? 60% of brands, because of these, when they were doing these kind of platform algorithmic things, 60% of brands were no longer targeting anybody over the age of 45.
Huh.
And I'm like, what? And the over 50s are there's a lot of spending power in that demographic. And I was like, but it's, again, that's, if you think about it as a person, you would probably make a slightly different decision about how to allocate that budget. But I think it's the danger of just disengaging your brain and outsourcing that purely to an algorithm.
But also algorithms have been a black box for a very long time. Mm-hmm. I feel like with the rise of search and with social, a lot of brands and marketers and agencies had to figure out the black box. And I know, as you would debate me and say, no, we haven't figured out the black box at all. But it was truly the auction black box is something, and I grew up, like I said, watching all that happen around me. People didn't know, a small business didn't know why their brand did not get selected over somebody else's. And that could mean the end of a small business, right? It did matter. And now, all of a sudden, with agentic advertising, you'll have all these agents doing all the work for you in the back end. What does that mean? For marketers, how do you know your brand is going to be selected? It's going to win the winning bids. It's going to be optimized for campaign performance. For users, for consumers watching these ads are going to be like, it may be highly personalized, it could be creepy, or it could be completely irrelevant and scammy. It's going to be confusing as hell without transparency and without guardrails. And that's what I'm worried about in agentic advertising.
And I was just going to say also, I think we sometimes forget, because there's so much of the language around AI at the moment seems to kind of almost humanize it, to make it sound like, it's a person that's learning and building memories. And I think it's then really easy to forget that it's not a person. It doesn't make human judgments. It is an algorithm. It optimizes based on signal. And sometimes the most potent signal isn't always going to be the most appropriate. So I have to look at this sometimes through when we're looking at some of the consumer laws and about what is fair and responsible advertising. And you do have to unpick that sometimes. So it might be like, I don't know, if we worked with an alcohol company, for example, and most of the brands that we work with in this space are actually really concerned about making sure that their ads are targeted in a way that is appropriate and responsible and to an audience that is right for that kind of product. But when you give this to an AI and you just say, well, I want to maximize sales, then it can look at the signals and it's like, okay, this device, this individual bought 2 bottles of vodka in the last 5 days. Oh, they must be in market for spirits. Great, we should sell more ads to this person. Whereas a human looking at that goes, this person probably has a drinking problem and it's not responsible for me to target those kind of ads. But it's like, brands don't want to be in that position. But I think it just, for me, is the importance of the human element and human oversight rather than just giving everything to a platform.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. It's like, because on both sides, because you have still kind of the unsolved question with the black box in terms of the ad auctions and whatnot, but to the point, there are more and more layers or lenses that are coming between like the consumer and the brand in a lot of ways too. Even knowing that an agent is even acting on your behalf, and it seems like a lot of people are not trusting. So even if I'm searching for something, I don't know if it's just based on my preferences or if there's something in the metadata that's then being influenced from like the advertiser side of things. And so where does transparency come in? Like, what does it even look like, I guess, when you have, because on the one, it'd be easier if there's just one agent, but you might have 4 or 5 different ones you're using for different things. Like I might use Perplexity for e-commerce and, or let's say I'm maybe using Rufus on Amazon to check something. So like, what does transparency look like when there's so many other pieces to follow at the same time?
Yeah. I think transparency to consumers is, first of all, it should not be this hidden, where do I go to understand what's going on? First principles. It should be easily searchable, findable, whatever the right word is, extremely simple. So anybody should be able to understand what is happening with their data and what is the platform doing with it. How is the platform monetizing? Why are they doing it? What does it mean to be in AI, in advertising, whatever that might look like? Now, in all of this, first principles aside, when it comes to like simplifying the education for consumers, I do worry that no one knows what's actually going on with all of these ginormous systems and platforms. And so once you start to crack open that black box, once you have the right governance, once you have the right auditability, traceability, accountability, then you can simplify it and tell the consumer what's in it for them, for us, for all of us, right? So that's how I think about transparency.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of those things, I think. And as you said, like not hiding it, keeping that stuff like upfront and clear and simple. And I think also, particularly in these sort of early stages of development, I think there's something really important about that final choice sitting with a person. We talked about this earlier, but your agent can go off and it can look for the products and do all of these things. But I still feel we're at a point now where it's like, rather than just buying automatically, it should be kind of coming back to the consumer and saying, hey, this is what I found, this is the deal, are you okay, do you want to buy this? Not just doing it automatically.
Yeah, or there needs to be like some sort of new like return policy on this stuff too. Like, oh, I didn't mean to buy that, or
And I mean, we have consent requirements in Europe for good reason, I think, and a lot of these technologies will need consent under existing regulations.
Well, it's interesting too on the regulatory side, and like I live in New York City, and New York State recently enacted a law around surveillance pricing. So anything that uses even like a zip code is has to be there'll be a disclosure in there that says this ad that you got use your data for example. I'm paraphrasing a longer law, but I'm kind of curious too, like because on the one hand the zip code might just be focused on like location-based stuff. But you hear the word surveillance pricing, you think it's probably a lot of other data. Like some of these systems are looking at, likelihood to buy something based on income, or like. So, any thoughts on how the transparency around surveillance pricing, for example, or like transparency around data collection is changing when it comes to, say, like a state law in the U.S. Versus compliance with, the EU, for example?
I think you'd really struggle to make that kind of surveillance.
Yeah.
Real cross-site surveillance pricing is going to be really difficult under a bunch of different laws. I mean, you'd have to comply with the fairness principle under GDPR, which is going to be really tricky for some of that side of things. And then when you look at the prohibited practices under the EU's AI Act, there are, practices there when you are profiling people in a way that can lead to a group of people having detrimental or unfavorable treatment based on something that they've done or data that is collected with them in an unrelated environment, which, is what we're talking about for the majority of surveillance pricing. So it's okay if you run a website and you're thinking about maybe rewarding consumers on your own website who are loyal customers and giving them a special promotion on free shipping or something. That's fine. But if you start giving somebody a higher price because of something they've done on another website that you don't own, I think that's it seems very likely, at least from the guidance, that that's going to fall foul of the prohibited practices. And of course, that's one of the areas that triggers the highest level of fines under the AI Act, which can be up to 7% of global turnover, and layering on the fact that you're probably also going to have some GDPR issues with this. I think it's going to be really difficult to do that in a way which isn't going to be risky.
Pressure's mounting in a lot of ways.
Right,
yeah.
It really is.
Well, it's interesting. So thinking of a lot of challenges, I know that Mozilla's been doing a lot around like trying to find new types of ads and new ways of having privacy-safe ads, but also having. I'm thinking like Mozilla, was it last year you guys acquired NNM, for example? NNM's like she can describe it more than I can, but a startup that's focused on having more privacy-enhanced ads. But could you talk about what NNM is and also kind of like the role it plays in this broader ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So we acquired Anonym because
Anonym,
they corrected me. They call themselves Anonym, more of the European way, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah. But we acquired Anonym because, like I said, we wanted to get and understand the ads industry and change it from the inside. Anonym absolutely is a privacy tech play in the ad tech stack, where they're making sure that advertisers' data is anonymized and user data is anonymized, and it's a safe sort of encrypted environment in which you can actually measure and report on results. Which it's like dare to dream when it comes to changing the industry. That's how I look at it. And then when it comes to ads on Mozilla surfaces like Firefox in and of itself, at the end of the day, our engineers are brilliant at privacy and security. That's how our brains are wired. So the first thing they think of is, how do I make any data private? How do I make sure that no one is identified? How do I make sure that everyone's anonymized? And then what can be shared that everyone knows is being shared? So the transparency aspect. So that's how we treat privacy-enhancing technologies, is what we apply everywhere. What it has meant, it's fascinating to watch, is working with all of our partners downstream, whether it's programmatic partners, measurement providers, all of them. Some of them are like, all these obscure things, traffic that's flowing, is this fraud? We're like, nope, we're Mozilla. We're the opposite of what you think of as fraud. But there's a reason why there's all this data flowing through that doesn't look like data, because everything is anonymous, and you can't even reverse engineer some of it. So it's like, we're working to change the industry the hard way. So the reality is, for others, it's quick. They'll quickly get ROI. They'll quickly make money. For us, we're like, nope, it's okay if we're slowing down. We're talking to every single provider in the stack to show them what anonymized data flowing through looks like. And everyone's willing to work with us and fix things and say, okay, let's treat this differently. It's privacy preserving. It's privacy safe. Like, great.
I think that's great, though. And also, I think it stands you guys in a really good stead for the future because, regulation takes a long time. The enforcement of this is slow. But at the same time, there is no doubt that regulators, certainly in the UK and Europe, are not happy with large elements of the current ads ecosystem. And it may well take a while for some of those cases to work their way through. But there is a clear direction of travel in the regulatory judgments that we've seen over here and the new legislation that's being introduced, that they are not happy with certain aspects of that. And I think the more there are alternatives to choose that are privacy preserving, that brands can adopt, the better they will be placed to weather the future in this space.
And ads in general, we've talked a little bit about this. Ads in general, many of you indicated you don't love ads. Who does? It does fuel the internet. It does fuel access to the internet in many parts of the world. There are many models. We can talk about that. But personally, for me, the way I think about ads is if it's something I know how my data is being used and not just being vacuumed up into the ether, if it's something that's highly relevant to my needs and it's useful for me and it's good for the brand, then I think it's worth it. So for example, I've discovered many local businesses, and those are small and medium businesses the discovery of those businesses means they can survive. And that's what I would use, say, for holiday gifting or something like that. That stuff is important in my mind. And I've talked to a lot of these SMBs when I was at Meta, for example. For them, it's the difference between making and breaking payroll. They're like, if you engage with our brand and buy from our local business, we'll survive. I'm like, great, that's the kind of ad I want to see, and that's the kind of brand I want to engage with.
Well, it's interesting too. You mentioned the SMBs, and I know that's a large percentage of a lot of these platforms' revenue. And on the one hand, it makes a lot of sense. They're able to make businesses out of this, yeah. And on the other hand, often the platforms will also use the small businesses of saying don't overregulate us. You're going to hurt the small businesses. So does it end up how do you kind of help the small businesses without using them as a shield for lack of regulation, I guess?
Yeah. I don't know what's happening in these platforms right now, but anyone who wants to use someone as a shield will. So it's really hard to avoid that. But when I was there, I think there was a real interest in helping small and medium businesses. There was a real interest in making sure those brands found an authentic voice, they found an audience to connect with. And that's part of why I enjoyed the advertising side, because of these sorts of businesses. And I do think that when you take a step back, like I said earlier, without advertising and subscriptions, what are the future models, right? We've got to talk about that. What is going to happen on the internet? How do you fund it? How do you fund access to the internet in an AI-based future?
Yeah, I'm curious, what do you both think about that? What are the alternatives?
You could go down a subscription route, but all the research that I've seen at least says that the majority of consumers are not willing, or not, in a lot of cases, not able to pay subscriptions for all of the content that they view. I think there was a survey in France really recently, and I think it found that about 30% of French consumers were willing to pay for news content, and they were willing to pay, I think, a maximum of €5 a month. And but this is it, right? And it's, but I don't think we've ever been in a time where we've needed a free and plural press more than we do today. And I don't want to be in a situation where we see that shut out behind paywalls and out of the price range of a lot of people. I think advertising genuinely has a really valuable role in keeping that kind of content free for consumers, and I do think that's important.
As a journalist, I hope they keep funding advertising or funding media too. It's interesting. I subscribe to a lot of publications, obviously, as a journalist, but it's interesting how people won't bat an eye at paying. Let's say, so the New York Times costs, I think, $40 a month. I think depends where you are delivery. It's cheaper for digital and whatnot, but I think the Economist might be $30. I'm mentioning these for a reason. This is the same price someone pays for maybe a dinner or something like that, or maybe it's the same price as Netflix without ads. But it's too much for them to pay for media. So it's interesting how consumers often pay differently. It's almost let me rephrase that for a second. People won't bat an eye at paying $40 to have dinner out, but it's too much to pay for a subscription to information they can get for home. So how do you change that mindset, I guess?
I think there's a lens here as well, though. I think we, in the industry that we're with, are privileged people. We are fortunate to have good jobs, to be, doing these things, and that isn't an amount of money that we could spend on going out for dinner. You know, there are lots of people who don't earn that much money, who can't afford to go out for $40 dinners, or, you know, and I would hate to see it where access to quality journalism is a privilege for the rich. I don't think that is the place we should be in.
Got some applause. It's such a good point that, like you said, like, it's a critical time for people to get access to good information that's quality. It's almost like a fast food metaphor, a lot of food metaphors. It's like, if you're gonna pay, you know, it's $2 burgers can be a lot less healthy. It's like, same with news, like healthy news is expensive. Maybe a question for both of you here, but we're talking more macro level again. We've talked about, you know, the ad platforms, we've talked about, you know, the role of advertising, but, you know, obviously Mozilla, you know, owns Firefox, and it seems like the browsers are having kind of a, you know, the browser wars everyone's talking about. Browsers are having a resurgence in terms of relevancy and a lot of the features that are being added in. So I'm kind of curious, what's the role of a browser, say like this year, next year, and that's different, like what's like, what are your thoughts on kind of like the relevancy, because it's no longer just a utility, but it's becoming a more important platform than it was maybe a few years ago.
Yeah, I think what's changing is how humans access information on the web, right? And how we interact with the internet or the web or whatever you want to call it, but how are we consuming data to the journalism point? How are we searching? How are we synthesizing? How do we stream? All of that is changing. I do believe all of the new walled gardens or new big platforms are experimenting with what they believe is a set of browsers that they're putting out there. Really, it feels like I might just flip back to the chat interface instead, right? For us at Firefox, though, one thing is sure. So there are 2 or 3 things we've learned over time, which is, obviously, first of all, trust is reducing. Forbes had an interesting article on this. Even in the US, where privacy is not that big a deal as the EU, there is a complete decrease in trust in any online platform because of AI. So a lot of people are making an active choice for browsers like Mozilla. So it's not just it's driven by regulation, but remember, we don't have the distribution advantage of Chrome or somebody else. So for us, Firefox is a choice, and Firefox is something people choose to be engaged with and through. And so what we want to do is give users choice when it comes to bring your own LLM, that's our sidebar, or have options for people to choose from that feel more like an AI interface. Because like I said, we've got to experiment and see where the world is going technology-wise, can't be left behind, but at the same time, users get to have a choice, users get to have a say, which I think is a very different approach from when you download any of these other new browsers, so to speak, that are coming out, which to me are more chat interfaces and, you know, different companies trying to experiment really with your data.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, like on the example of Perplexity, I know one of the reasons why they have Comment is because they want to be able to pull in a lot more data from, you know, off-platform. And so it's, I'm so curious, like, what that'll look like even to regulate that, because it's different than a lot of these other, yeah, it's, yeah.
It's going to be a minefield.
Yeah, well, I bet, yeah, but it's interesting, yeah, it's like on the one hand, they'll say, well, we want to personalize stuff more, but it's a whole different thing that seems like regulations often aren't good at keeping up with innovation. So it's, I mean, so in some ways, if I'm kind of following that line of thought, it's more important to have a browser that's going to have that higher standard of privacy. But like, are there other ways? How do you end up convincing users to maybe stick to one browser, or like to grow, say, like Mozilla's user base? Like, what does that look like, I guess?
Yeah. So I'll say this, for us, competition is always the welcome thing, right? We believe in competition, we believe in choice. So we're not going to steer away from those values at all. I do think when we stick to who we are, we're true, we provide web compatibility, functionality, we allow you to choose between different modes. If you want to test out AI things, we have that. If you want to stick to your private mode, we have that. You know, whatever it is, there's something for everybody. I think that's what attracts users, and that's what keeps users. Listen, I don't love making conversations with my seatmates on flights, but it's interesting. I met someone recently, and we were just asking each other where we work, and they're like, oh, yeah, Mozilla, Firefox. I absolutely love being on Firefox. Why? Because this person said that they're in the finance industry, and this is someone who really cares about their data and how data is used. But also Firefox is a choice this person made when they have both company-issued laptop and personal devices that came configured with whatever, Chrome and Safari or whatever else. I asked this person, are they experimenting with other browsers like Comet and Atlas and all of that? Yes, but who do they come back to? Firefox.
Yeah.
So I think it's what we have for people that matters. We've seen an increase in engagement. We've seen an increase in growth, especially on mobile devices, and that's for a reason. It's the conscious choices we're making.
Katie, any thoughts on, we were thinking about the data privacy part of this too, or any other, like the compliance part, what does it look like too to think about kind of the role of a browser or a partner like that versus a platform?
God, I don't know. It's going to be really, really tricky. The thing is, I think, browser platform, you still have to comply with the same laws. I think sometimes there is this, again, there's a narrative that it's so complex, we can't comply with GDPR and all these things because it's fundamentally different. We're changing, those laws have been around for quite a long time now. You have to find a way to build things that complies with the regulations in the markets that you want to operate in. And I do think it's going to be interesting seeing the intersection between some of these new advances and some of the laws that are in place. Like, I think I mentioned this EU product liability directive that's just been extended to cover software, including AI, for the first time. So if your AI causes harm, you can be prosecuted in the same way as if your toaster had backfired and caused, but it's a really different mindset, I think, that people will need to come to terms with. And, how do you make sure that, you are adhering to all of these different rules and laws? And it's going to be really interesting seeing where that nets out, but I don't think I've got all the answers.
Yeah, because you can't really have an AI recall, like you can have like a recall on a toaster, for example. Yeah, like when things break or whatnot. Yeah, so I want to make sure we also leave time for questions. And so, we've got other stuff we can cover, but do people have questions?
I see a hand up there.
Yep, got a question back there. I don't know if we have a mic or if you just want to speak up or.
Callie, there's someone up there.
Right back there, yeah. Any over here next?
It's okay, I think they
Good. One there, cool.
Hi, I work in a interesting space, which is digital marketing and fundraising for nonprofits and social causes and whatnot. And so the advertising industry and the digital industry is very interested in what little money the nonprofit section has, but there's at the same time all these regulations about what they can and cannot put in their advertising because it might be marked as political or a cause or whatever. So I was just curious about Mozilla's position on nonprofit and social advertising, and also just in general what suggestions or just thoughts you have about this issue with nonprofits trying to get a voice in this digital world that's being drowned out, but suffering because of it. Thank you.
I wish I was more educated on that topic, so I'm going to say right off the bat, I'm not the expert on nonprofit advertising laws, but Mozilla's position is same thing no matter who you are, which is high quality ads. We want to make sure that it follows our basic trust and safety rules, so no scams, no misinformation. There's a whole bunch of rules that we have. So that's the extent of my knowledge when it comes to how we think of trust, safety, and protecting users on the platform. I'm not entirely certain of compliance-based regulations when it comes to nonprofit advertising. So I'll be the first one to say that. I'm not sure if...
I'm also going to say it's not my area of expertise. The little bit I do know in terms of how that's working in Europe, it certainly does feel like, a lot of nonprofits have been affected by rules, that are designed for sort of political advertising. And, we've seen a lot of the big platforms respond to that by just going, well, blanket, we're not taking any of these sorts of ads. What I do know about some of those rules is that they are really focused around, or a lot of the focus is around things like use of personal data. So that's where I feel that actually solutions like you're talking about will be, potentially beneficial here. Because if you're not, using people's personal data to do that targeting, then, maybe that helps as an option.
Right. Yeah. I think what you're also referring to are the social, electoral, and political type of ads, the social issues, probably. I remember this from my days at Meta, where we tried really hard to box them as well as we could, but I do remember nonprofits getting caught up in that net because we were trying to prevent the improper form of political advertising instead.
Question over there? Yeah, yeah. And also
Yeah.
probably organic search, I'm guessing, too, you're talking, like, is that another area, too?
Just organic
Yeah,
conversations.
yeah, in general, yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you this from a consumer point of view. I have to train my mind. So let's say I'm on Reddit and going and researching a particular product. And I'm on there looking for real authentic reviews on the product. It blows my mind that now I have to go to 5 extra steps to actually understand if this is a placement by the brand and they have reviewers from within the company or the agency actually writing all these positives about it. And I have to literally go looking for dirt, you know? And sometimes I don't find dirt because the marketing agency has done a brilliant job of clearing the Reddit platform of dirt. But this is where I think consumer trust comes into play. While I think it makes sense to have an authentic voice and build community around certain brands, I worry that if it's not done in an authentic manner, and if it leads to a new kind of misinformation, there's going to be backlash. People are vocal online. It takes one social media video to go viral to lose that trust with the brand. That's just my consumer perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think transparency is the really key thing there, and I think it also actually is increasingly from a compliance point of view as well, that the need to be open and honest about when reviews are paid for, and also that's not just paid with money, but it's incentivized with free products or access or any of those sorts of things. It's actually declaring that and saying, you know, this is an ad, this is what the transaction was behind the scenes that led to this content. And I think increasingly we are seeing that legislated for within various consumer protection laws. So yeah, but it's good practice anyway, I think, as a brand.
Any other questions? Yeah, right in the middle.
People love convenience, but also people love speaking to other people. I work a lot with small businesses, helping them digitalize. They keep on coming to the same problem. People come to them for a conversation, but then we drop with $5 cheaper Amazon. And then they get the information in front of a real person and go online. And they want the convenience of picking up from Amazon market or not really waiting for it to be delivered from a third-party carrier. So how do you convince people to buy locally, buy organically, even though it is probably going to be maybe 15-20% more expensive? But you have a conversation.
Yeah.
It's a hard one.
I think that's where the emotionality and the long-term arc of building trust comes in. I have done this. So I talked about holiday gift shopping before, where I've engaged with a brand that's local and used them. Because I've tried ordering faster on Amazon, I did it because of the speed and convenience of the shipping, and it turned out to be not that great. So that broke trust as a consumer. I'm not going back there again. And I'm an avid shopper on Amazon, I'll tell you that. But I'm still not going to do it for these moments because what the local brands delivered 5 days later was higher quality and was a much better gifting experience, personalized, whatever it is. And I felt better emotionally about supporting a local brand. I think that's what takes time to build. It takes time to change consumer psyche when it comes to that long-term arc of trust. And why do you buy from someone local as opposed to Amazon, for example, because it's faster shipping-wise. So that's sort of my personal experience. I do agree with you. But the more brands can put into building authentic connections with consumers, it has to be done digitally. It can't just be in real life. I think the better it is in the long run.
And I think that's, you know, from an advertising point of view, where the alignment between the small business and the environment that you're advertising in is really important. You don't necessarily have to use personal data and stalk people around the internet to do it, but I think you want to be advertising to people who share a similar mindset and care about similar things. And I guess that's what I mean when I talk about, having a brand and an advertising environment that are aligned. I guess, it's another plug for Mozilla there, really, isn't it? Because I suspect that your users are going to be aligned to those sort of values.
Particularly because we don't target users.
Right.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, right there. Yeah.
Thank you. Karen Middleton from the University of Portsmouth and Conscious Advertising Network. I've got a bit of a comment and a question, but it's around ad fraud and transparency. So looking in the UK around using the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, in particular to mandate know your customer checks, and I wondered if you had any thoughts, anything to say about that, because the potential is that that would alleviate a lot of the problems in the black box environment that you've been talking about, as well as perhaps delivering more authenticity of ad supply chains, and then brands being able to position their ads in a more safe way.
I'm not an expert on that particularly. Is that similar to the DSA type of requirement to disclose where that it's a legitimate company?
In the UK, yeah, but it's the point is around know your customer checks and mandating know your customer checks so that all elements of the supply chain are identified.
I mean, yes, in theory. I might come and pick that up afterwards with you if that's all right, rather than getting into some of the weeds on that.
Yeah, sure.
But yes, there is definitely a need for more, I think, supply chain transparency in some of these areas.
Okay.
It seems like, too, yeah, more people are calling for, like, it doesn't exist yet in some ways, but, like, I know, like, it's like having that for advertising like you have for finance, yeah.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think we have time for one last question.
Yeah.
Maybe? Yeah. There's a couple
So we
hands.
got question right back there.
White T-shirt first.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just thinking, so like the way we're getting information on the internet is also changing a lot with language models, and a lot of people are using those for their information. And I think the natural next step is a lot of people are going to start advertising there. And I guess it's going to be a lot less transparent the way advertisements are put there. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how that space is going to change and how we would need to regulate it to keep the space still safe.
Yeah. I mean, just take like show of hands, how many people are using any LLM at all? Doesn't matter, right? We're all using LLMs. That means, and an LLM has a chat-like interface. You're supplying it with a ton of context. Imagine an ad popping up in the midst of that context. Kind of feels invasive in my mind, unless it's done in a way that you chose to. So you said, I'm sharing this data with you. I know it'll be used for advertising. And the platform is being transparent about why it's being used, right? We're not there yet. It's number one. I haven't seen that yet, but we need to get there. I worry we won't for a long time, that level of transparency. The second piece is the black box we spoke about. That's going to be the machine in the background. A lot is being made of agentic advertising. We were talking earlier. I don't think anyone's quite cracked that nut, by the way, at any of these large companies. Everyone's still relying on the old machine learning techniques to automate ads and all of that stuff. It's coming, where you'll have agents for measurement, talking to agents for auction systems, agents for bidding. That's where the black box is going to have a compounding effect. And you as a consumer or you as a marketer are not going to know a lot that you should know. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to take a while for that to net out. But it definitely feels that with all of these things, that transparency about what data is sitting behind those ads and user agency over, am I happy for that data to be used in that way, feels really critical to maintaining trust in those sorts of areas in the long run.
I'm also curious about that. Yeah, like all the answer engine optimization that people are talking about is like, on one hand, like how much needs to be cited in terms of like what went into, those questions on both sides. But yeah, it's a fascinating topic. We have time for one more question. Yeah.
So one of my favorite apps is AdBlock, right? And I think for many, right? And it is a behavior that has come through losing trust, I think, in ads. And it can happen for many reasons, right? One is privacy or just annoyance, irrelevance. Now, the theme of this conference is unlearn, right? Now, for me to trust ads, I have to unlearn that behavior, and I have to take the step towards disabling AdBlock and let ads come in, so that I improve my engagement with it, or I improve my relationship with it, or how I perceive it, right? It's a very tough thing to go back and unlearn something that you're built for good, or you believe you're built for good. How do you view that?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm the best person to answer it, but I'll take a crack at it because I actually enjoy the ads that I see, and I've made choices on all my online platforms to see certain types of ads. I haven't gone as far as blocking them. I think the choice is yours. First of all, I want every individual to feel like they're in control of their destiny and their choice. So if you're curious about what can good ads look like, ads that are relevant, personal, and not targeting you around the internet, creeping you around the internet look like, that's when you could play around with not having ad blockers. That's your choice. But for a lot of people, it's about, I want to discover that local brand, or I really need to see info. Like, I'll give you this example. My heritage is, I'm from India, and I live in the US, I'm a US citizen, but for me, it's about shopping online for Indian jewelry or Indian clothes. I don't know how to go discover that stuff, so I've made a conscious choice to engage with those brands on Instagram, because I know I'll get retargeted for more such brands, but that's just a small sectioned off vertical that I want. So it's my choice and I want it, and therefore that's how I interact with it. If there's other crap that shows up, and believe me, it shows up all the time, I'm quickly Xing that out and providing feedback, hoping some algorithm picks that up somewhere. So that's just my 2 cents on how I engage, but that's by choice.
I feel like as an industry also, on the advertising side, we have to like unlearn some of the things that we've been doing and maybe take a bit of a step back and remember that not everybody loves our ads as much as we sometimes think that they do, and perhaps get a little better with some of that. Yeah.
And it's a good point. And back to the unlearning theme of this week. So it's, yeah, a lot to unlearn. Yeah. So, well, that's all the time we have, unfortunately. But thanks all of you for being here, and thanks to our panelists.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marty.